You wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't say, my God, taking this land and this guy? This is beautiful. Look at how they killed the land, the trees, and everything. This is just native. This is the bush of this making the best they can for generations.
These are paintings and things from the Caribbean that I'm selling along with my art. Do this or no? Do that? Yeah?
All of it.
It's a video.
It's a video.
This is how the trading post functions.
Oh.
We trade in many things. My favorite is tribal art. You'll see a lot of tribal art in my collection. We try to just, in the early days of our trading post, when we got our first, part of our grant, we tried just to trade in our native things. But our native things were so simulated that we didn't want to just trade in with the regular stuff, like an aloha shirt or, a cap with aloha on it. And all of the things you find in every store in Hawaii, Hawaiian themed things. That's not what we were looking for. We were looking for deeper cultural expressions. You'll see a lot of sprinkling of tribal art. Either I do myself, like that tiki on that ball, and the tiki on this board. Some of our necklaces, that little figure painted on a rock, and things that reflect our culture. And so we fill the shop with a lot of that. We call this peaceful trade. Anytime you see natives trading right alongside a pathway or a roadway, that's the bottom line. That's like, that coincides with our most ancient ways of trading, where we used what was called the law of the splintered paddle, which was peaceful trade on the side of the trails. And we carry that on. You don't see natives abundantly in Hawaii because some of them are afraid to do it because they are pushed back so hard by regulation and rule and taxation. So you don't see natives, but I'm a little different. The native that I am, I set the pace, the peaceful pace. That would you rather I be doing this, or would you rather me be in a protest tearing the city down, causing economic loss by just doing mayhem?
That I've seen too many romantic dreams up in lights falling off the silver screen. My heart's like an open book for the whole world to read. Sometimes nothing keeps me together at the seams. I'm on my way. I'm on my way. Home sweet home. Tonight, I'm on my way. Just set me free. Home sweet home. Home sweet home. Home sweet home.
That's only a vision. That's sort of like the vision of the tear in the eye of either our elders of Hawaii or the elders up in the Americas. And that tear is dropping because he's looking out of the land that he saw with just the grazing grass and the buffalo. And today he sees a whole different thing. And it brings that tear to his eye. Every day families lose their land. The United States is supposed to be there for us. And at least look into, is there a federal question now? Is there a federal authority, a special trust to these native people? You cannot just bulldoze their dilapidated house. You cannot remove them from that bush in a tarp tent because they have special protection by us. It's a trust. They trust that we will look into their benefit. My name is Maui. I'm also known as Chief Maui, and I run Native Hawaiian trading. I'm very faithful with my trading post. I always put love in it each and every day. Meet so many beautiful people, and I do have background in sovereignty. My sign right in the window. And I do action at the individual right that we're doing political action for is a clarification from the United States responsibilities of the administrative level, the governing level, and the Justice Department, who's enforcer of what is governed, that they get it right to us on how we utilize our land and where is our land. Is our land equitable, or is it just in despair? Because if it's sitting in despair, that doesn't make sense. Because why would our land have to sit in despair, which would be detrimental to our being and our condition, and other lands in Hawaii are not? So there's an imbalance. We may say that's a monopoly, that lands that can be developed and you can get all kinds of money use from it, but the natives' land can't go anywhere, and there's no treasury of any sort that you can mention, no benefit, that we're living in bushes, and we're living in tents, wherever, but yet we have all this vast lands that America set aside for us as our reservation. That's ridiculous, and that's what we're about, actually, because the land is the key to who we are. And all my brethren and sisters who just want to dance hula and plant tea leaves and run around in a malo and do ancient dances with spears, their right, their freedom to do that is granted. But those natives in my tribal who want to be scientists, who want to be construction engineers, who want to be spaceport development and telecommunications, guess what? They're also granted. So we don't limit what God has given to us. So if God gives some native who is now progressing those types of visions and schooling and accomplishments, God bless. So we're not foolish people. We're not the kind of people that say that our native people are just going to be pro everybody out, pro against tourists, pro against white, pro against Chinese, pro against Japanese. We don't go there. We only want the dignity to carry on continually as we have carried on. There's no changes in paradise except in ourselves. And that's what's important to us, and how we attain for ourselves. That's called self-determination, and that's called self-governance, and ultimately that's called inherent sovereignty. We are our own. If those who fail us, if local government fails us, if federal government fails us, and private corporation fails us, we can only depend. We will never fail. As long as people know that truth, we the people will never fail. You know, the noni tree is one of our spirit trees too. Check this out. Look at this spiritual prayer right here. Spiritual prayer. in Hawaiian and English. We had visions with the tourists early in our struggle. We wanted the local government, through different authorities, mainly the tourist authority, to try and sponsor the native in a substantial way, so that every tourist who entered our port would give us almost what you would call a volunteer support, where through literature or through a product or something they would get, they would in return give a penny, a nickel, or a dime. And that times the 7, 10, or whatever amount of millions of tourists entering the port, we would generate, if it's a penny, we would generate 1/100% of the entire entry into Hawaii. If it was a dime, we would generate 1/10% of the dollar. I was a designer of the moon calendar, and this calendar came out in the 1974 when I designed it as a kid, and this would be the thing that we would have gave them for their dime. It was teaching the world the story of Hawaii in the sense of the mythological story of how Maui caught the sun and created time. So these are moons of winter, spring, summer, and fall. The harbors and the ports are basically the beneficiaries of the harbors and the ports are only two people in Hawaii: the citizens of Hawaii and the natives of Hawaii. The natives were defined in law. In 1921, the United States Congress defined us as no less than half pure Hawaiian. And in 1974, that was the law of the land. It still is to this day. In 1959, Hawaii became a state. That was the law, and it still is today. Natives of Hawaii are those who are no less than half pure Hawaiian. We number in 1960s, the late 60s, we numbered about 5,600. And 2015, we number about 1,600. Our majority of the natives are in indigent condition and homelessness. The real primitive stuff. This is a pig rock, pig head rock. Big head rock. This one is an owl. This one here, from here you can see his face, owl.
No?
Yeah, there's an owl there. See his eyes and his mouth. Owl rock. Oh, that's the guardian bird. It's to bless the land. I come from generations of natives. I was born here as a native. I'm apparently born with my sovereignty. When I was born of 10 children, my pure Hawaiian mom, I was born with an inherent right as a half pure blood. I was born with a right. And when I went away to school in California, college, university, I reached there. I went away right after early junior high school. That's when I was maybe in the 7th grade. Came home after 2 years of university and college. I knew what was up because I was exposed. I went away. I saw all the other movements in the States. African American, Mexican American, Native American, whatever American. The movements, the civil rights, the people who wanted dignity. I learned that in college and university and debated it, learned of it. So when I came home, it was like nonsense. I became the leader of my field of not going into the field of nonsense. I wanted sense.
We're looking for the president to say, I went to school in Hawaii, to natives can no longer violate them. They are all protected. They are a living blood native, cannot evict them from the land. Period. We have enough resources that anyone who's trying to evict them will just, you know what I mean, secure it, but you can't. I want to go clear the land and throw out all their trash and put the land and throw them out like trash and move all their junk cars. And you know how ghetto poverty is. It's no different than white. And they clean it up and put $1 million, maybe $12 million houses on the top. Now that's what goes on in paradise. Where did Papa go? Where did Grandpa go? Grandpa died from that type of treatment. He couldn't handle it. It was hard for him. He just died in the process. And one more obituary of a Hawaiian man who's the foundation of his family dying. And that's where I want to go. I don't need to go anywhere else.
I was baptized before I left Hawaii. I went to school in Waikiki because my mama was a native and used to sell flowers to feed us. She sold flowers on the streets, days. And I was going to elementary school at Waikiki called Thomas Jefferson, named after the president. Thomas Jefferson. And when I was 5, my grandma probably died then. And when my grandma died, they decided, because my grandma had a deeper root than my mother, she was closer to where our tribal lands were and who we were more, because her generation was closer to the core of the natives of that period. My grandma born 1896. So she died in 1958. And when she died, I was in elementary school, and they immediately took me and my sisters away from my mother and placed us in homes. Why? They found my mother unfit as a native woman selling flowers on the streets of Waikiki and us living homeless in a car. So they decided to take my brothers who were crippled, my 2 brothers, and the 3 children, my 2 older sisters, my 2 older brothers, and me. And my other brother and sister was with my grandma, and she died. When my grandma died, they moved in to dismantle the family, take the children away, and try to crush the spirit of the woman who gave us our inherent birthright. I am a surfer, and because we surf in Hawaii, it's probably why we're probably not more aggressive. That's probably why we're not walking the streets and having protests, because the ocean somewhat keeps us in balance in a peaceful nature. Because that aggression that we feel inside of us, when you go in the ocean, you just release it. That's a blessing of Hawaii. So people in Hawaii, there's a lot of, there's a lot of things under the rug in Hawaii, people suffering just as people.
And that's where the conflicts are. And that the resolve is not there. The resolve is civil rights and enforcement of those rights.
We use our land to raise money. Those monies could go to our needs, whether it was to run our governance so we can get more money, and eventually we can get to what we really want to get to, which is houses built on our lands so that we can house our own. And then centers like children's centers and elder centers and schools and anything normal that tribal people, you would say, are now moving in a positive direction. Either the land that we struggle to get returned to us as tribal people, and we're asking the United States to intervene on our behalf and take those lands in trust for us. Why? Because we need the progression of land and how we're going to use it and how we're going to partnership to ultimately develop it. Because land is the key to financial support. If you have land, you can go to the bank and you can get out the loans on the projections of your partners in-kinding their money to get more loans out of institutions, of banking institutions, so that you can develop things that can start to come into windfall, they can start to come into the plus. What comes into the plus? What can you think of? Well, we could enter into things that were proven in the plus. Federal grants with the military, tourist-related things, sport-related things, surf schools, arts and craft products, food concessions, forestry, ag science, aquatic science, medical science. We could grow enough marijuana to catch up with Colorado because you can't tax us as natives in America. Why would we want not to get into that? The natives in America are the only federally acknowledged in federal law who have the right to dispensaries and the right to do business with marijuana. They're the only ones in America who have a federal right. And so why would we not want to go there if it's worth billions of dollars? So the thing that Hawaii would do, Hawaii would push us to the side and they would get into it. Like they would push us to the side and they would take the tourists. They would push us to the side and they would get the military contracts. They would push us to the side and they would go take the fisheries out of the sea. They would push us to the side and they would develop utility energy in Hawaii. So everything that goes on in Hawaii, why wouldn't we want a share of it? Why wouldn't we want to develop in the proven areas that have proven themselves? So the fear of us becoming and breaking the monopolies in Hawaii is a real fear from some people. But we say, so what? Why? Because we never got anything. So if you gave it to us for the next 25 years, a fair share of it, it would only bring us back to the norm. And it would take 25 years. If my tribe was to do a prototype of our land, and we had, say, 1,000 acres of land, and we put on that land, with the use of the water and the use of some kind of a food product on an organic level, and that food product was converted into a flour, and that flour could be shipped out to nations that have no food in time of famine, in time of destruction, natural destruction and things of that nature. And we shipped those bags and sacks of flour that we converted from whatever, sweet potato, breadfruit, banana, taro, whatever. Do you know I would want to venture with a country that has 100,000 times more water and land than we do? So that they could see that they can do the same. And some countries, if they use their lands right, can feed hundreds of nations in need. Can you think of a country like that? Because Ukraine would qualify, and South America would qualify, and Russia would qualify, and China would qualify, and India would qualify. All great nations would qualify to partner with us. We want to be part of that growth. And we want to put a couple of our own buildings up, and we want to have where those buildings would bring us resources to this area that in another part of Hawaii we could make that beautiful retreat of trees and beauty and preserve it that way. That for every building we achieve, it would dedicate that 1,000 acres would be maintained. And if every building had that principle in them, then maybe Hawaii could have the balance that it needs. The only independence that my tribe talks for is the right as a tribe. That is independence. Because a tribe means that you have the right to self-govern, and you have the right to regulate your own. And you have the right to track your own development and treasure it. That's the most important thing. The land is our treasure. Well, I always humorously say that if a zillionaire showed up on the scene, and he was an environmentalist of some sort, where he said, you know what, I have zillions of dollars, and I'll just buy out all the interests of that overcrowded area. And every hotel that I buy, I'll tear down and put a park. Do you think that might happen to the future? It could, but most likely it's not. Protest is something that is a freedom of people because they don't want to fail themselves, and they feel that all other has failed. And many of the protests in America today is abusive policing, police powers. And you know, police powers, the extreme part of police powers is when you go under martial law and they bring in the military. That's an extreme police power. And you know they've been doing that lately because certain parts of America, people have stood saying, enough is enough. Don't discriminately stop a young man who hasn't even been caused to be stopped, and then all of a sudden you're killing him. What's up with that? You know what I'm saying? That's ridiculous. And then because he has the human backing of people like him, if he's a young man, you're gonna have 100,000 young people who's gonna tear a city down. Because you killed a young man and you had no justification to even stop this young man. But when you did, it came into a thing that you had to shoot him dead. And so police have to sort of learn these experiences. These are really, really heavy experiences. They're two human beings, just that one has the power and enforcement to use his weapon and shoot you dead. If he feels threatened that, you might pull the gun on him, he might get nervous and shoot you dead.
So it's easy for students in college or university to talk this, that, and the other, but for decades after decades, their professors, their students, their debaters, none of them resolved. Everything they did was not resolved because all of them was off. None of them was right on the target. What solves things now? Yeah? So I debate all those things. That's what I do.
It would be so beautiful if you went into a homeless camp of tents along a sidewalk, and each tent learned how to put something on a little cloth on the sidewalk or a table that had items on it that they themselves found or made, and it offset, you know what I mean, just so they can get a little bit, so they can go get some cool refreshment or some food and things of that nature. And that would be the day when I see a movement of that nature happen within the spirit of those people who have sort of trodden their spirit. Because, to be in that place, you have to be at the lowest of your life to find yourself in those kind of predicaments. And, I've seen that all my life. I've seen, old elderly people, just, they call them bag people. They push their carts and then they lie on the sidewalk because they feel so safe there. And now Hawaii wants to pass a law that penalizes the most downtrodden. It doesn't make sense. There should be a law that you can penalize those who are not downtrodden, but you cannot penalize those who are really downtrodden on the side of the street. That's ridiculous. How can you penalize them anymore? You know what I mean? The only thing you could penalize them more is just go over there and shoot them in the side of the head. Or lift their bodies up and throw them in a dumpster and go throw them in a hole. That's probably the most degrading thing you could do to them, is just take their life. But why do that to people like that? That's ridiculous. That's the most ridiculous law. But they're saying that law is pertaining to certain places, privileged places like the streets of Waikiki, Honolulu, whatever, because they want to protect the integrity of those districts. And to some degree, at least there's some sense in it. But where you say you can't do it here, you have to balance it that you can do it there. That's the only sense I say, is that there has to be places for the homeless to just be. You can't just say all of it is restricted, because that's ridiculous. And you know how homeless people are. They always move continually. And how hard is that for a homeless person to pick up and move again to another place? That's ridiculous, again, but they do it because God inside of them says, you know, you are my children, and do the best you can, children. Survive. That's the main thing, is you survive and you feel life and you feel love inside, that I care for you. And that's the best you can do for homeless people. I was talking about recycling?
Yeah.
Guess what this the top bags, which have the lightest stuff, because all the bottles are in the heavy cans. That goes on top of the car roof, and the others go inside the car. That little catch right there, $200. And that's not always that. That's a good trend, because that's what the homeless camp recycle project I would like to see, where when they go dumpster diving, or however homeless people spend their time looking through the city and finding all these different things that people discard, that maybe they could also put it out, and people who want to create something so people who want to help the homeless can go down to their little sidewalk, you know, presentation of recycle items, and see something that they could say, yeah, I'll give you $5 for that, you know, and then the homeless person at that tent made it, and then the next one could learn from that, you know, because a lot of this shop is a way, is recycling cultural objects and, you know, old bottles, from trash to treasure kind of stuff. Like a lot of those bottles right there were found just recycling, and I still do it. And then when my friends go with me to the recycle center and they help me, you know, bring all the stuff in, I give them, sometimes I give them up to $80 of my cut. That's when we really have a giant load. Some of our loads get to about $350 worth. And we go down the road with bags tied on our truck or our car, just so funny looking. There's a three-pronged system in the political spectrum. There's the Congress that passes things for the benefit of their people. Then there's the judiciary who checks it in law, if it's constitutional and things of that nature. And then there's the administration, which is the executive, which is the president, all the secretaries. There's only three distinct natives in America: the natives of Hawaii, the natives of Alaska, and the natives of the 48 states in America. And those are the only three Native Americans.
It's kind of the same thing that's happening in Ukraine, because Russia is taking over our land. The part of Ukraine that Russia took is actually the tropical part that's more like wild, and there's the beaches, it's on the Black Sea. So it's actually really beautiful, and that's the part that they took.
South Shore is the most scenic part of Crimea. Mountain range is located close to the shore and creates this gorgeous view. The views at Farosway and Gorbachev's dacha used to be can easily compete with views from Hawaii at Napali Coast.
They want to keep Ukraine down, the different forces in the world, so that Ukraine is a great resource. If they can't get to their resources, one, they themselves can't blossom, and two, they cannot blossom as a strong nation in the world. So if they have a conflict at the core, and the farms and the ports and everything is being destructed, how far back does that set the country?
With this change in government from Ukrainian to Russian, people faced many different challenges. Their financial life became much harder. Prices for produce went up. Prices for rental, long-term rental, went up. And on top of it, many people lose their jobs because Ukrainian employers, they're leaving the area. On top of it, much less tourists came this year than comparing to previous year. So there is a lot of uncertainty for local residents, but despite of that, they're still optimistic.
There has to be a common answer that is related to all struggles on earth. One is to immediately bring peace so that the people can prepare themselves and then find, with their own natural resources, find partnerships that can come in to help them repair. Even if they have to sell whatever, their product, their mineral right, whatever gets them up.
Okay.
Because you can't be in conflict with your neighbor, especially not a country as powerful as Russia, because they can come in there and just set all the people back. All the people who struggle for whatever they struggle to maintain as a nation of their own. Could Russia come in and just take it all away? Yeah. So in Hawaii, there's movements that are similar. We would never want to make America an enemy, because America is a good alliance to us, because they are the enforcers of our birthright. Ukrainians have that ability never to fail themselves, because they all hold the truth in themselves. The trading post was given its first grant in 1987 in the North Shore, and I'm still here. I got a grant, $110,000. With that grant, it maintained $6 million worth of North Shore land, and it also maintained a $1 million collection, and all the culture and all the things we've done since 1987. But locally, the government has taken most of our $6 million worth of land. They took it from us. This is the last piece we have. This is my primary residence, and so I carry on my governance, I carry on my communications, I carry on my trading, my cultural discussions with people. I carry everything on from right in front of my home. The end of the circle of corruption starts with the individual endeavor. The individual enlightenment is the beginning of the process. Only when individuals are enlightened can the process begin that is directly impacting corruption. Because if you have a process of enlightenment and fairness and dignity of your contribution as an individual to humankind, then the process has started. The starting point is those who are enlightened. And those who are enlightened, if they become in high places, like they become a governing governor or a governing president or leader of a nation, and you have a president who is enlightened, then yeah, a lot can happen. So these people don't think about the problem, but they think about what is the solution. That's why they say wilderness. They only go out in the world and say, first, you have to be at peace with yourself before you can do anything. Because if you're not at peace with yourself, you're only going to struggle to try to find peace with yourself. You know what I mean? Once you find peace with yourself, that's the beginning. I learned this from great people. And to name a few, you know, Gandhi, Jesus, just to name a few. Muhammad, Martin Luther King, there's so many to name. Who is the great women? I had her name back here. That was Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa? The Pope? Who else they had out of Tibet?
Dalai Lama?
The Dalai Lama, exactly.